Hi everyone, and welcome back to another webinar in our Rethinking Manufacturing series, which is brought to you by BDO Australia. So my name is Ryan Pollett, and I'm BDO's National Manufacturing and Wholesale Leader. And if you've joined us for some of the previous webinars in this series, welcome back. It's great to have you again. If it's your first time joining us, then our Rethinking Manufacturing webinar series is all about tackling the big issues for Australian manufacturers in today's world, sharing insights from a range of perspectives and backgrounds, including technology, international trade, tax, sustainability, and more. All of our previous webinars in this series are available on our website. You can access those very easily, and the team are adding some links in the chat box right now, so you can get a link to those if you would like to access them after this. So before we go any further, I'll just quickly draw your attention to some housekeeping matters, and there's a slide that we're just putting up here. So to start, this webinar follows a panel kind of Q&A style rather than being a slide-based presentation. So instead of doing a presentation, we've put together a handout that you'll be able to access in the Handouts tab. While you're all automatically muted, if you're listening in, we do encourage you to contribute for the webinar by submitting some questions, which can be done via the questions tab, and also taking part in our polls. So we're going to have a few polls today. We aim to answer all the questions that are submitted during the webinar, but if we don't get to yours, don't worry, we will follow up with you afterwards. So this session is being recorded, and everyone will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording, any handouts, and any other materials that are referenced. So just for your information. Finally, if you've got any technical difficulties, there is a support button, which is one of the bottom tabs on your screen. So please do use that if you're struggling with anything from a technical perspective. All right, so just to kick off today's topic. So in today's webinar, we're going to be talking about grant funding for manufacturers, exploring the different funding options available, including the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund, the application process, as well as key considerations for manufacturers once they've obtained the funding. In particular, our experts will be sharing some practical tips, insights, and guidance from a range of perspectives. Also, for those looking to obtain funding via the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund, we'll be providing some specific guidance to help you get your preparation, your application in over the next few weeks, as that funding is due to close in January. We've also got some information on our website about that fund, which you can read, and our team will post a link to that as well in the chat box shortly. So of course, the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund is just one component of the government's modern manufacturing strategy, which was announced in the recent budget back in October. The modern manufacturing strategy, which I'm sure you would have heard of, is a $1.5 billion investment in Australian manufacturing to take place over the next 5 years. It's targeting 6 national priority sectors within the industry, which are areas that have been identified as competitive strength or strategic national priority for Australia. The government is collaborating with industry to develop short and long-term roadmaps for these priority sectors, with industry funding provided through 3 programs: the Modern Manufacturing Initiative, the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, and the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund. So in terms of the $1.3 billion Modern Manufacturing Initiative, which is, I guess, the largest component of the strategy, that's currently at the stage where invitations for expressions of interest will open late in the first half of 2021. So whilst that's not open at this point, there will be significant opportunities to come under that program, as well as the existing ones that we've already mentioned and we'll talk about today. So a lot of the tips and tricks that we run through today, I think, will be useful as we move forward as part of that initiative as well. All right, so I guess just to introduce the speakers that are joining me today, the panel. So with me is the Executive Director of B&R Enclosures, Chris Bridges-Taylor. Hi, Chris. So B&R Enclosures is a family business that supplies an extensive range of products such as standard and custom-built enclosures, data racks, and cabinets for residential, industrial, mining, data, telco, defence, and hazardous area applications. Chris is also passionate about the opportunities that modern technologies, digital transformation, and Industry 4.0 pose for SME manufacturers. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Ryan.
Also, lovely to have you here. Also with us today is Michael Sharpe, who I'm sure many of you will recognise. Michael's a regular panel member on this series. Michael's the National Director of Industry at the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, or AMGC. So Michael plays a key role in engaging with industry across Australia, including linking partnerships among the country's manufacturers and research facilities, which is vital for creating high-value jobs and products through collaborative projects. Welcome, Michael.
The only thing is trying not to shock people today, Ryan, but I'm not in the car, so the mobile
yes.
in the garage.
Yeah, that's right. So Michael's usually in the car, as many of you will probably know. He's always on the road visiting many of the manufacturers out there that he works with. But yeah, just for a change, he thought he'd be at home today, which is good with Christmas coming up. So glad to see you back at home base, Michael. Also joining us today is Nicola Purser. Nicola's an R&D tax partner at BDO. Nicola leads the Research and Development and Government Incentives team at BDO in Brisbane. Nicola has a depth of expertise in national and international R&D incentive programs, having managed large and complex claim engagements in Australia and the USA. So welcome, Nicola. Also a recurring, also joined us on a previous webinar. So thank you for being here again. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing all of your thoughts and perspectives on this interesting topic. But to kick things off today, we're just going to start off with a quick polling question, I guess, just to kind of get a bit of a flavour for interest around this topic and what people have experienced. So one thing that we'd like to ask you up front, and if you can just click on the options on your screen there, is whether you are considering applying for a grant in the next 12 months. So you've got a choice of yes, no, not sure, or non-applicable if that doesn't apply to you. So if everyone can participate and just vote on the options there. We'll just give it a few seconds and then we can start to get some results. Hopefully you've all voted. Should we maybe bring up the results and see how that's looking? Here we go. Oh, here we go. Yes, 44%. So that's pretty significant, which I guess is good to see, and obviously shows that we've reached the right audience, I guess, with this webinar. And hopefully, for the 44% of you who have said yes, you'll find this extremely useful in terms of some practical tips and guidance. And obviously, if you need more help, you can feel free to reach out to any of us after the session. For those that are not sure as well, hopefully you'll find out a bit more around this topic as we talk through and get present some more information around what's going to be happening in this space in the next 12 months and beyond. And then another question that's linked to that one. So we'll just do this one and then we'll get into some Q&A. If you have applied for a grant in the past, did you seek assistance? So did you seek any help from anyone in that grant application process? So that's yes, no, or non-applicable. So we'll just wait for that to come through. Just give it a few seconds. So again, if everyone can vote, that would be great. Okay, let's have a look at how that's worked out. Here we go. Okay, so yes, 20%. Okay, so most people watching haven't previously applied for a grant, it looks like, because they've put non-applicable, which is fine. For those that have, yes is 20% out of the 100. So the majority that did apply for a grant in the past did seek some assistance, which is good. And I think we'll talk a little bit here around the benefits of getting some help along the way, whether it's from someone like BDO or from the AMGC or somebody else involved in the process. So we'll talk a bit more about that. But that's a good kind of testing the waters to kick things off. All right, so let's get into some questions. And the first topic that we're going to touch on is around the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund, which is obviously it's quite topical at the moment as round 2 of funding has just come out in terms of that particular fund. And as I mentioned at the start, it's connected to the modern manufacturing strategy that the government announced recently in the budget. So Nicola, perhaps I could kick off with you if that's okay. Could you just tell us a little bit about the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund itself and also what's new this round 2 of funding?
Yeah, so as you may be aware, there was a round 1 of the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund that came out 2019, which then grants were awarded earlier this year, just sort of after the COVID shutdown, as we'll call it. That program was very highly oversubscribed, and I think in part of the announcing the second round of this, the government has sort of tightened, I guess, what it's looking for. To help with that process. And I guess the key changes are really that we need to align, your project must align with the 6 national manufacturing priority sectors, which are resource technology and critical minerals processing, food and beverage, medical products, recycling and clean energy, defence or space. So your project must align with one of those priority sectors. The program is designed to support SME manufacturers, so you do need to be manufacturing, and you also, an SME is defined as under 199 employees or under. So a maximum of 200 employees. We have sought some clarification around that because there have been some previous grants where they've had that criteria where it's been on a per entity basis, not on a consolidated group basis. So we're just waiting to hear back with regard to that. One of the things that they have also done is in the round 1, there were 2 streams of funding, one for smaller grants and one for larger grants. With this program, it's only aimed at those larger grants, so there needs to be a minimum spend on your project of 400,000, of which the government will support 25%, so 100,000 of funding. And the maximum grant is $1 million, so your project maximum amount of $4 million. There is eligibility criteria, and you must meet that eligibility criteria that's set out in the guidelines. So it's really important that you comply with that. There is no flexibility with that under this program, as we do see under some other programs. There is a little bit of flexibility in the way that it's administered. One of the things, as Ryan mentioned, the program is now open. It opened last Friday and closes on the 21st of January. I do think it's not fantastic timing pre-Christmas for most manufacturers. It's your busiest time of year. And everyone, I think, after this year is really looking forward to a good Christmas break, but you can use that break to do your grant application.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's nothing like a Christmas present, such as some money coming through by way of grant funding. So I guess it would be worth that effort over that break if it's something that the manufacturers out there are thinking that they're going to be able to take advantage of. But yeah, thanks, Nicola. That's a great summary. I guess one of the points that's quite interesting that you were very clear on just now was it's very important to make sure that the project that's being funded fits squarely within the 6 key industries themselves, and also the other criteria that are within the the documentation that supports this scheme. I just wondered, is there any kind of practical examples that you might be able to give around that in terms of what sort of leeway there might be around companies that might not be sure whether they're going to fit within one of those 6 key industries or not? I mean, for example, there was an audience question that came through prior to this webinar around a company in the agtech space. So the question was, we are preparing an EOI to a regional council for an education facility focused on agtech, innovation and sustainability. Would such an initiative and theme be supported in the strategy? So I guess, agtech's not specifically one of those subsectors, but food and beverage is. There might be some connected ones. Do you have any thoughts on that, Nicola?
I think with the eligibility criteria, they're going to really struggle because they're not actually a manufacturer. So okay. I think that's saying, and I think we're going to go into this a little bit later, there may be quite a lot of other grant programs that may support that type of project. We have had a lot of questions from companies in regard to the MMF, particularly that where they supply to those industries, but they're not squarely in those industries themselves. What I would sort of just reiterate is that the program's really designed to support new technologies and processes that's going to, be transformative in your manufacturing process. And I think if you can show that clearly, if for example, I was talking to somebody the other day that supplies to the defence industry. Now they do to other as well, but if they're integrating some technology that was specifically to enable them to ramp up their production or improve their process to the defence industry, then that may well qualify. But if you're just a supplier to defence as well as, say, for example, if you just make metal piping and you supply that to anyone, you're going to struggle a little bit. What the feedback we keep getting is you really need to fit within those 6 priority sectors to be considered under this program.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, and I think obviously with the Modern Manufacturing Initiative as well, it'll be interesting to see if that plays out in a similar fashion, where they're also quite strict around those sectors and how that's applied. But it does then, I suppose, lead into another question that you just touched on there, Nicola, which what happens. I'm sure a number of manufacturers that might be watching this might be interested in grant funding and other opportunities, but perhaps don't fit within those 6 subsectors. If that's the case, maybe Michael, I could address this to you, and then Nicola can add to it. What would you recommend that those businesses are looking for? Is there any alternatives to things like the MMF that they might be able to consider if they're not, obviously not going to qualify for the MMF?
Yeah, the good news, as we know, is that this year everything's changed, and suddenly the whole world is talking about manufacturing, and the politicians are getting on board as well, right? So we've seen the various state government budgets coming out addressing manufacturing, the federal budget, of course, which is some of what we're talking about today. So the federal budget is $1.5 billion for the modern manufacturing strategy. And so the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund, which we're talking about now, is $52 million out of that $1.5 billion. So there's a lot more to come. People should be getting prepared now, and there's lots of information out there on business.gov.au. We also have a heap of information on the AMGC website, and I know people can reach out to you, Ryan, at BDO, and there's plenty coming through. What's good right now is that on the government's website, they're asking for manufacturers to provide feedback right now. So this is your chance for everyone out there to provide your own thoughts and feedback as to what that strategy should be around. And I don't think there's ever been a better opportunity. But in the federal budget, our organisation at AMGC, we received an additional $30 million for our project funding. So to date, we've done 82 projects that we've co-funded, and one of them is with Chris and her company with B&R Enclosures, and so highly successful projects. Feel free to have a look on our website and you can see those range of projects. But I would say that one of the key things I always tell our members is they should be applying for government grants of all varieties and reach out for guidance. And if it's your first time, there's plenty of people out there that will offer assistance, and that's what we're talking about today. But if and I often do get this comment that I've applied before a few years back and I wasn't successful, so I didn't bother again. I've never tried again. And I say you should keep trying because the people that receive your application then get familiar with your business. They're familiar then with what you're trying to achieve. And you know the old story in life, the more you try and have a go, the more you'll learn and you'll get more efficient at it as well. So I think there's an upskilling there that we can all do just in applying for government grants, because there's going to be a lot of them coming through.
Excellent, thank you, Michael. Nicola, anything to add to that? Perhaps is there any other programs that you wanted to mention?
There's a lot of industry-based programs. So, for example, if you're in defence, there's the CDIC. There's quite a number of programs under that. There's if you contact if you're in food and beverage, then obviously through Department of Agriculture, there's quite a lot of grant funding available through that. So there's a myriad of grant funding available at any one time, state, local, federal. There are programs out there that have databases of all the grants that are available, and people can run your grant report and say everything that is open at the time, and then strategize with you as to what are the quick wins or potentially quicker wins, and what might need a little bit more effort in going for. But the other thing I just mentioned as my little bandwagon is R&D tax incentive, always available to anyone in any industry.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And Ryan, I might add too, if perhaps we could put the link up for an organisation called APR Intern. And APR Intern is a federal government initiative for postdoc PhD students. and the federal government will pay, usually they'll pay 50% of their salary to come out and work in industry. So these are people that have finished their study to get their PhD, and they're awaiting their certificate. And during that 3 to 5 months, the federal government will usually pay half their salary. What changed last month is they've now upped that, and the federal government will pay 90% of their salary. And so that's open for any organisation to apply for across a range of skills. So it could be around a sales and marketing plan. It might be around a design engineering project. But have a look at it, and the link is there now, I see. So have a look at APR intern, because that's the sort of thing, and we're going to see more of these types of announcements. It's a very good time for being in manufacturing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. And you've obviously, there's the job maker plan as well that was announced in the budget that's, about creating jobs in all industries, including manufacturing. So I think there's a number of different things there. The other one, I suppose, I wondered whether it might be worth mentioning briefly is the export market development grant for any exporters out there. Nicola, do you deal with that particular grant much?
Certainly we do quite a lot, and it's actually been very oversubscribed over the last few years. There is a set pool of funding that's allocated to it that's been upped, and this year for 2020 they loosened some of the export performance criteria because of COVID, but that program is going through quite a bit of change at the moment. It will stay the same for 2021, but from 1 July 2021 they're looking to a prospective grant scheme, as opposed to at the moment it's a reimbursement of expenses. But if people want more information on that, I'm happy to provide.
Yeah, the other one, Ryan,
Wonderful.
which we have spoken about previously, is around the Entrepreneurs Program. So I would encourage everyone out there to have a look at EP or Entrepreneurs Program. Again, if you haven't heard of it, it's worthwhile having a look at the website. Some great programs through that, including accelerating commercialisation, but a range of support initiatives that the government will support and help fund for your business to grow. So have a look at those, and there's many more opportunities. But I know, Chris and her business have been highly successful with applying for grants over the years, and I know the AMGC project we've done together was very successful. So I'm sure Chris is going to tell us a bit about that.
Yeah.
That's great link, Michael. You're doing my job for me there. Well done. Thank you. But yeah, absolutely. That's perfect timing, because I was just going to bring you into this, Chris. And
thanks,
so
Michael.
really keen to get your story. Really keen to get your story around your grant application process that you went through, and maybe just give us some of the reasons that led you to seek that funding, if that's okay.
Yes, happy to share our story. I mean, as we stated, we're a family business of some 65 years. I'm second generation. The third generation are taking over. I now call myself an executive director. I was general manager at the time, and are happily moving into a different role in our business. But if I reflect on our history, we actually have a history of some success in grants and enough of putting a lot of effort into grants and having them knocked back because we didn't fit the profile and hadn't really taken on board the profile. I mean, we thought we had a good case, but clearly we didn't. So at the time that our paths crossed with AMGC, it coincided with a stage in our strategy process. As a business, we've been running a pretty strong strategy process, with 5-yearly updates, and could set digital transformation into our long-term, into our current strategy. And we're challenged about how to take what is a traditional manufacturer, with some significant investment in plant and equipment, but to really embrace what it meant to digitally transform through your whole value chain, starting from your factories, but then equating it to your customer experience. So in this process of being out there and just exploring and say, we know could paint the big picture, we know there's something, but from where we sat, it was not so clear. Our paths crossed with AMGC, and started to hook into people who could bring knowledge to the table. And then when the opportunity to do a grant project under a grant through them, where the grant, I think that 25% is about right. I mean, at best, these projects, the grant funding provides seed funding. It helps get a little bit of internal momentum, because you're so focused on staying in business sometimes to get these more long-term projects up and into shape. internally can be challenging. So the association with AMGC did that for us. And we were also able to be a little bit more long-term and aggressive with our project because of the additional funding that we received, so that you could take a more strategic as opposed to something that was quite short. So that really motivated us to work with AMGC to be helped along the journey. And the other part we liked about the AMGC association is that it's part of a bigger strategy for the Australian economy and the manufacturing, and it gave us the opportunity to give back for the assistance that we have by being engaged with the broader community and saying, we're taking a run for it. This is what we're doing. This is what we're learning. We're happy to share, and with that creates momentum with our internal business as well. So that's on that grant. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you, Chris. Some great background there to the grant, and yeah, sounds like it was a really positive experience working through that with AMGC as well. So that's great, and we'll touch on some of some practical tips and things around the application process you went through shortly. So as we're just going to get into that topic now. So but yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you for that. So moving into our sort of second topic for the day, which is around some of those practical tips and tricks in terms of grant applications and obtaining funding. And perhaps, Nicola, if I can start with you on this one again. So for manufacturers who are looking to obtain grant funding, whether it's with the MMF or another grant, could you walk us through, I guess, the general application process itself and the different steps and what tends to happen?
Yeah, and I think Chris touched on it. I guess the first thing is really trying to understand what it is the government is trying to support and how neatly you fit into that. And generally, that's about having discussions with the likes of Michael and others, industry bodies, those sorts of things. Just being really tapped into, what is the program for? It's because often what we find is that we'll put out an announcement that there's a new grant available, say the MMF, and we'll get a huge amount of inquiry from all sorts of people who go, oh yay, free money. And one thing Michael and I sort of chatted about the other day is if you were looking for private investment, you would actually put quite a lot of effort into getting your story straight and understanding what you're looking for. You wouldn't just put, I don't know how many of us, would read a prospectus, have no other insight into that company and throw a lot of money at it. It's very unlikely. So it's really important, and Michael said this at the beginning, get yourself known. And it's not, I'd hate to say that there isn't proper probity in all the grant processes. I think the government's learned from previous experience with that. But it is that if they do know you and know that you have the capability to deliver on the project that they're going to fund and it fits their criteria, then you're much more likely to be successful. So I guess I'm saying do your homework. Don't just think that you can engage a grant writer. Here, I want some money for this piece of equipment, go away and do that, because I can tell you now your grant writer will not know your industry. Will not know your business the way that you do. They'll do their best. They'll do some Google research for you. They might even get some economic analysis involved, but they can't do your grant. They can't make your project a better project. They can just present it in a slightly better way potentially. So I guess do your homework. Make sure you understand the merit criteria. Give yourself plenty of time. Project manage the grant application process the way that you would project manage your actual project. Understand what the deadlines are. For example, with the MMF, the deadline is 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Chris and I are in Brisbane. That means it's 4 p.m. And also, don't try and submit at 3 p.m. because everybody else does. I've been burnt before. The system crashes. You're trying to argue that you did try to get it on time. There's all the really sort of simple things that can make the process a lot smoother for everyone. So there's some tips. Michael, you may have quite a few more.
That's very
Michael, do you want to add to that?
And the timing one is a good one. Unfortunately, we hear that a little bit too often, and then computers crash and you miss it by a minute. So yes, certainly agree with making more time. It's very important. I think I've got a couple of points to add. So in the AMGC projects, and maybe we can put a link to the AMGC research button, and you can see a lot of our publications there around such things like our latest research is the 10 ways to succeed in Australian manufacturing. What we also have is the sector competitiveness plan. So I do encourage people to look at our publications and to try and match the research that we, the wording, the language that we publish. And if you can adjust your applications to suit that language and match the wording that we use, you'll find then that the people that are reviewing those applications are familiar with our research, and so they'll know, or they will acknowledge that you've done some homework and that you know about transforming your business, and that this particular application is trying to lead you down a path of that. So I think it's important if people can try and have a look at the research, match the language, ask questions. The other one I always try and encourage more of is partnering with universities. And so the AMGC projects have research partners. We think that's vitally important for the transformation of Australian manufacturing, that we reach out to our research community. We've got some of the greatest research minds here in Australia, some of the greatest research minds in the world right here. And so they're, in some respects, it's an untapped market. So if we're talking about the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund, you might be looking at, let's just say, a new robot. But what type of robot? What brand? What do you want to do with that robot? And if you can go to a local researcher and talk to a team at the university about the end goal and what you're trying to achieve as a business, quite often these universities have done all that hard work for you. And they're agnostic to brand. They're just looking for an outcome. So they might say, you should use XYZ robot with this particular algorithm that we can help develop with you to come up with this outcome to grow your business. So, collaboration, Ryan, we've talked about this many times on our seminars. Collaboration is a key driver. So there are a couple of points I would recommend to everyone out there.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, it sounds, that's a really interesting point, and I think it touches on, as you say, a topic that we've touched on previously as well, and also we had an audience question come through actually on that topic, so I might bring that in now. So the question was, is there scope for national labs and universities to partner on a grant with an SME lead? So I guess, Michael, you were talking there about, engaging with, a university perhaps early on, perhaps prior to submitting a grant application. Is that something you've seen done before? I mean, could you even go so far as to partner on a grant with an SME and a university?
Absolutely. And so here's a further opportunity. Perhaps you haven't been involved with applying for a grant before, or maybe you did and they weren't successful, so you haven't tried again. But what I always recommend to people is to get involved with those universities. And we've got a lot of them, right? And a lot of them are world leading. So we've got great research institutions, including the CSIRO and ANSTO and others. But what you find is they're always looking for industry partners. They want to put their research into action. And so potentially you can become part of an ongoing project at your local university, or potentially even interstate. Just depends on what you're trying to achieve. But at AMGC, I'm sure we could find the right person to connect you with. But then you can become part of a larger cohort that's working on something specific that might have outcomes for your business. And an outcome of that would be that these people would help and guide you to apply for a particular grant. And so, the collaboration here again is that everyone learns and all boats lift. Again, it's this collaboration. We see it time and time again. The learnings, the opportunities, the networking that comes from it, it just helps those companies to lift.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Michael. Chris, perhaps I can bring in your experience again here as well. Just interested to hear, as a manufacturer that's gone through the grant application process and obtained grant funding, could you just share a bit more about what your experience was like around going through that process? Perhaps you could talk a bit about any support that you received along the way. And I'm interested also to know if you did get involved with working with any of the universities or other research institutions that as we just mentioned as well.
So we've got experience with a number of grant areas, and they can vary from more operational, involved with training, and smaller initiatives through to major initiatives a capital investment, and also the project that we did with AMGC in size, by comparison to the total journey, was quite small, but it was in the early days and it was kind of proof of concept pilot. So it was strategically placed. So for the more operational, the experience is a bit lighter touch, and also depends on the dollars that are involved. So it's getting that right combination of what's the intent. Are you working at the strategic direction of your business, or are you trying to accelerate and augment what you're currently doing? The augmenting is a lot easier to do and can be a lot more light touch. When we then go to the larger projects where it's investment in major equipment or in a transformation of the business, setting it against a strong strategy has been a requirement of ours, because, I mean, free money sounds nice, but it's only a small part of the total cost of the project, and the real cost is your opportunity cost. So if you're chasing the wrong rabbits, you've got free money, but you've got a capability that you can't monetize in future revenue, and you break a lot of hearts because you put a lot of effort in, and 2 years back you look back and you say, well, it didn't achieve what it was, and that's because strategically you hadn't placed it correctly. So then when it came to the actual process, and with AMGC, in the webinar, I'm really happy to say the collaborative approach they took to working with us to explore and clarify, and this was in the early days of digital transformation, before we had the benefit of the documents. So we actually had to do a lot of the wording with AMGC in those early days, that we could then construct a persuasive grant, not only to the AMGC funding and the board, but also internally, because we had to gain the support of our own team and access to resource internally. Then we actually then had help with the wording. We engaged someone with a marketing background to convert our, because I'm an engineer and we're mostly an engineering type people, into that persuasive process. The accounting was pretty straightforward. Identification, you have to identify eligible and not eligible costs. You have to get ready in setting up to tracking those costs, and then map that into your application, so that if and when you are successful, you're ready to go. And then in the case of AMGC, the assignment of the case manager to work alongside you was also a positive experience. So highly recommend them as a group. So when we win, it's been good. When we haven't won, it's very disappointing. But that's life, you don't win them all.
Thank you. Yeah, there's some great feedback there. Nicola, maybe I'll just interested just to get your perspective around, Chris and Michael both talked around, some of the support that's available from the likes of AMGC. I think, Nicola, you mentioned earlier grant writers that are out there, and obviously, ourselves as BDO and some of the work you do, you assist people through this process. Do you have a view around the best way for people to go about seeking out help, and who they should be going to first, and that type of thing, if they're looking for grant funding?
As I mentioned before, it is your project. You're going to know it best, so you really need to put the time and effort in, and not just outsource the grant application process. That said, there are some very good grant writers out there. I'd like to say that my team are good at that as well. It's around presenting the information that you provide in a good way. The other thing that the likes of a BDO can assist with is things like, we've got an economic analysis team, so we can bring those guys in to do some of that modelling work for you. We can assist in looking through, supply chain and those sorts of things, and bring in the expertise that we sort of have across the board to support your broader application. But you have to own it. I really believe you'll be more successful. And I just wanted to mention, because we did work with Chris's team on one grant project, and what I thought with B&R did very well, and maybe it's their experience, was that they were very prepared with what when the grant opened, what they needed the money for, and what their next piece of equipment, in order of priority. And they put in an expression of interest, and they were successful with that to go to a full application. And they were able to then say to the government, actually what we put the expression of interest in is actually no longer the best use of our resources and the best bang for buck, and we'd like to actually get this piece of equipment instead. And the government was happy to work with them on that basis. So don't feel locked. I mean, sometimes in these grant programs you are a little bit locked in to what you put your application in for, but don't be afraid to have those discussions, because the government does want the best bang for its buck, in all programs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point to hear that. And yeah, it just sounds, it's so important to enter into that dialogue early. And yeah, as you say, to be upfront with what you're looking to do, and if your priorities change, to have that discussion, because yeah, it sounds like there is flexibility there within some of these programs. So I think there's some great tips there. So thank you all for those tips, and I'm sure we'll get a few more as we go through the session. But I just wanted to bring in another polling question, which is linked to what we were just talking around the research side. So this polling question is to do with collaborating with research institutions, as we mentioned, is something that comes up quite often around grant applications in particular. But the question in this case is around grant funding, and just interested to know, for those people that this is relevant to who are listening, how long have you been researching your particular project or the equipment that you're looking to undertake or purchase, in terms of this grant funding that you're considering? Is this, a recent thing, so under 1 month, 1 to 3 months, you sort of reacting to an opportunity, or is this part of a longer term strategy that's been in place for more than a year? So interested to kind of get a view on this from those who are watching. So if you can just select the one that's most appropriate to you, and then we'll just close that off in a second. Okay, let's have a look at the results. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so we've got quite an even spread in terms of some that are under a month. So I guess those would be the ones that, are perhaps reacting to the situation or an opportunity that's come up as a result of COVID, or some of the things that everyone's been going through over the last 12 months. To some, another third of the people that are more than a year. So again, this is probably part of a longer term strategy, I'm guessing, for some of those people. But that's an interesting poll result, I think. And I guess a linked question to that, so another one just to put up. So this question is, if you were looking to seek external support or advice for your grant project or your equipment purchase, who would you consider? So I guess we've touched on a few options there as we've been talking. Interested to see if people have got a view on which one they'd approach in the first instance. Is it government or industry body, professional services firm, much like BDO, or perhaps an academic or research institution? Okay, so we'll just give it a second and then we'll close that off. Okay, let's have a look at the results. Okay, well, good news for us, 60% professional services, 40% government or industry bodies. So that would be, perhaps AMGC, and then not too many at this point suggesting an academic or research institution, but I think that, that's fine. I think perhaps the key point, I'm happy to, for the rest of you to comment on this, but I guess the thing that I've taken away from that little discussion just now was it's not necessarily one of those in isolation, it's probably a combination thereof. I think, Chris, your example, you've worked closely with AMGC, you've worked closely with BDO, obviously you've had that experience as well. And probably it's not horses for courses, there's a combination of expertise that you need, as long as, as Nicola mentioned, taking that ownership for the particular project and bringing in a research institution if appropriate. Does that resonate with you as well, Chris? Or
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I cannot stress that it needs to be against your business strategy. The money is an important part. I mean, that's of the equation, but it's what it's going to, where the project sits in your own business, your own strategy project, and then the networks of support and knowledge that you have around. Industry is changing, or how business is done is changing fast. You used to be able to do it just at a steady pace. Now you need to accelerate, and reaching out to the many sources of information, be they university, be they industry bodies, be there other groups, and then to create environments where you've got meaningful agendas to talk about and bring that knowledge into your business is an important part. I think the advantage of the grants and the money is you can accelerate, and time matters. So you've got your project, you know what you want to achieve, you dream about doing it. Some are beyond your dreams, some that you can dream about doing in a reasonable time. When a grant comes up, and from my experience, the intent of the government is really to accelerate the transformation of manufacturing. So then to be able to present your story and a project ready to go, and say we'll be able to move faster, run quicker, win more business, provide more jobs here in Australia, that resonates.
Wonderful, thanks, Chris. Michael or Nicola, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Chris is bang on with, it's got to align with your business strategy. So any reviewer of these applications will be looking for the jobs and growth. Out of this grant money, how will it create new Australian jobs, and how will it help your business to grow? And if it meets those basic criteria, it's got a good chance, right? So this needs to be part of your overall business strategy. Chris is a leader in Australian manufacturing, and it was great to have her as part of our Manufacturing Academy, and she's been able to share her experience of transforming B&R enclosures into being a leading manufacturer in this country. So I would encourage everyone to have a look at that platform, because it's real people, and Chris is here with us today, but with real world experience about how they've been able to grow their business. And before the COVID crisis, manufacturing was transforming. We are creating higher skilled jobs. It is the nation's capability. What are we capable of making and producing and potentially exporting to the world? But since COVID, the whole world is talking about manufacturing. So there's a real opportunity there now. But have a look at Manufacturing Academy. There's some great examples on there.
Superb. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with those sentiments as well. Okay, so just one more polling question for the day, and this is linked to a topic that Chris, you've mentioned for your experience, and Michael, you mentioned as well. So we all know that grant funding can be highly competitive. Nicola mentioned earlier that some of the programs, the recent ones, have been heavily oversubscribed. So not everyone's going to be successful, no matter how good your application is. In some cases, you're trying to give yourself the best chance, but there's no guarantees. So if your business was in that situation, or if you haven't been in that situation, perhaps imagine that you were, and you didn't get some grant funding, would you still go ahead with your investment regardless? So that's the question that we're asking here. So yes, no, maybe, or non-applicable. So we'll just kind of get a bit of a gauge around this. I'll just give it a second. Here we go. Okay, good. That's positive. Yes. So the largest response there is still yes, which I think does tell you that as Michael just mentioned, perhaps around some of the sentiment that's out there at the moment, there's a positive future ahead for Australian manufacturers, and regardless of the support, if the project makes sense and that company's on the right growth trajectory, they would look to fund it regardless, which is great to see. I guess, does anyone want to comment on that poll result?
Well, again, I think it reinforces the fact that you're putting a plan together. So it's part of your strategy moving forward. Let's work out the fundamentals of this application. What are we going to achieve at the end? wow, you know, we've been successful, off and running. If you weren't successful with perhaps 25% of the funding or maybe up to dollar for dollar matching, and you weren't successful, do you go ahead? Well, it made sense when you applied, so what's changed? And so I think it gives you that it shows you that you really need that effort up front to put that business case of why this makes sense for you right now. And then it's great to see that poll result. I think that's really important because if it was going to transform your business, you'd be looking at every opportunity to make it happen.
Just the grant
Absolutely.
funding just makes it so much easier, and you can move faster. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
good.
Yeah, and you made a really good point earlier on that, Chris, around, you know, it gave you the opportunity to be more strategic, I think you said, in terms of your approach and take a slightly longer term view, which,
yeah,
you know,
and more
maybe
bold.
that little bit of extra, yeah, more bold. But that doesn't, regardless, it doesn't mean it wasn't the right strategy in the first place as well. So that's really important. And sorry, Nicola, I think I interrupted you there as well.
With the MMF specifically, 20% of the weighting for the merit criteria is around, you know, the impact of the grant funding, and the way that they've worded that in the guidelines is not that you wouldn't go ahead with your project without the grant funding. It's what will the grant funding do? What additional value for money will the government get by you know, giving you 25% to enable you to either fast track or invest in slightly higher equipment, more expensive equipment than you might otherwise, or additional piece of equipment that you might not otherwise have invested in.
Absolutely, and presumably for those people that have, you know, Chris, I think you mentioned you had some failed applications as well over the years. I guess you learn a lot through that process, and hopefully you take something away that helps you with the next application. And I think as Michael mentioned, you know, probably the advice would be, and you know, I'm interested to get your thoughts, but don't give up, because obviously you've been successful in later rounds and applications, and you know, don't give up at the first attempt would be probably some good advice, I'm guessing.
Correct. But you're not in manufacturing and you're not in business here if you give up on the first attempt anyway. So a little bit of a knockback is just being in business, and it makes you refine your argument.
You definitely have to be resilient to be in manufacturing.
Yeah. Look, and sometimes no is the right answer, because the lure of cheap money can distort good business. And so when you do win it, it's usually validation that your strategy is solid and good. When you don't win it, it's not that statement, but sometimes it is. And that turnaround and the learning can save you a lot of money in the long term, because it saves you chasing the wrong rabbit, as we've done a few times. That's very expensive.
Absolutely.
They're very good points there, though, Chris, because as I mentioned earlier, just being able to upskill your organisation to being into grant applications and using people like the team at BDO to help you along that journey can really build that capability, so you can then use that as a track record and say, you know, we've been successful in earlier grants, we know what we're doing, here's some of the work we've done before with government or with other grant providers. That can count for a lot. So it's really building up that library of opportunity that's gone before. Yeah, it's a very good point you raised.
Great, thank you. So the last thing I was just going to touch on briefly today, as we're running a little low on time, was just a little bit about how to get the most out of the funding and what happens after. So Nicola, maybe again, I'll just start with you quickly on this. So once a manufacturer has access to funding of this type, is there anything that they need to be doing or thinking about in terms of the compliance considerations, or, you know, any sort of ongoing requirements that you typically see?
Yeah, look, most of the grant programs have requirements around the acquittal process and making sure that you are meeting your milestones. And then some of the grants obviously provide the funding on a milestone basis. So you need to make sure you've got that project plan in place, and keeping up with that, and keeping up the dialogue with the government with regard to the progress of your project. And I'd probably say Chris is probably better positioned to respond to that, because she would have been through that process more so than I have.
Okay, yeah, great point. And Chris, yeah, how would you comment on that? Have you found the compliance, onerous or not too bad?
Not too bad. Yeah, you do a bit more internal tracking of resources than we had at the time, to make up the matching funding or the matching effort, because when you're internal you just get on and do it, but you've actually got to track particularly your overhead time that you normally wouldn't do. But otherwise, no, and particularly with the work that we've done with the more recent grants, they've been very manageable, probably because you set up right from the beginning. You understand that. But I think to get the most out of the grant funding, it's really the opportunity is to create momentum in your business around an element of your strategy. That's the real benefit, and to expand your network of both from a marketplace, but also knowledge and support.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree. And thank you very much. And Michael, maybe just one last thought from you on this. I know, AMGC, obviously you stay involved and work closely with, the companies that you're supporting, and stay involved with them, I guess, after you've provided funding, and because it's part of the role of AMGC. Is there anything that you'd like to add around some of the points that Chris and Nicola have just mentioned around that post-grant funding stage?
Yeah, well, again, I think, as been mentioned, it really then gets into a real validation process. So it really gives you that discipline around meeting those project milestones, things that you've agreed to up front. So potentially it makes your business stronger and helps the management to really focus on the outcomes. And I've seen that time and time again. And the 82 projects that we've done to date have really shown and demonstrated that manufacturers out there are really having a go right now. So it's a good time to be in manufacturing, no doubt.
Okay, and I would just add the advantage of making a promise to someone external on a strategic project that needs to happen means you do stay on track, and that is the advantage even when it's a small amount, because there's many other demands on your time. But to know that you're getting paid to do what you should be doing is a positive force.
Fantastic. I think that's a great way to end the discussion today. And yeah, so thank you very much to all of you for the discussion, to Chris, Michael, and Nicola, for your valued insights today. I'm sure everyone that's watching has found it a really useful and practical session. But if you do have more questions or you'd like more information, please do feel free to reach out to us here if you have any questions, and we'll make sure that we get those to the right person. Or if there's any questions that you have on any of our previous webinars as well, as I mentioned at the start. So we're going to take a little break from webinars until after Christmas now, as I'm sure everyone needs a bit of a break. Yeah. And I know, Michael, you're going off the grid, you mentioned to me earlier, so we won't be bothering you for any more of these until you're back in the new year.
Merry Christmas,
but we will be in touch. Yeah, we will be in touch again, with everyone watching in the new year to talk about, some of the new webinars that we'd like to put together in this series. And also quickly to mention before we close off, there is a short feedback survey that will launch once we close the webinar today. We would really appreciate it if everyone watching could quickly fill that in and give us your valued insight in terms of how you thought today went. And we're really keen to hear about any other topics that you'd like us to talk about, and put a panel together for future webinars, as we've really enjoyed doing them so far. So I guess without further ado, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thanks also to everyone who's watched the series so far and made it a great success. We look forward to continuing discussions such as these in our future webinars. And once again, thanks to everyone on the panel, and I'll see everybody in the new year. Thank you.
Merry Christmas. Bye.
Brian, Chris.
Merry Christmas.